Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here, focused learners, because today we're going to fundamentally shift how we understand a deeply entrenched issue, and that's gender bias in leadership. You know, for decades, we've literally been looking at this complex problem completely backward. So today, we're going to fundamentally restructure how you view the evaluation of leaders. Let's get right to it. Okay, let's dive into this. Why on earth do we keep telling women leaders to fix themselves? I mean, we've heard this exhausting advice for years, right? Lean in, be more assertive. But hey, not too aggressive. Change your communication style. We're constantly telling women to just adapt. But what if the problem isn't the leader at all? What if the real issue sits on the exact opposite side of the table? Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll look at the leadership evaluation trap. Then we'll flip the script entirely and break down 3 distinct psychological motives: identity protection, value alignment, and resource dependence. Finally, we'll talk about fixing observers, not women. All right, part 1, the leadership evaluation trap. We have literally spent decades focusing on changing women's behaviors. Women are handed this endless, exhausting list of strategies to try and navigate what's called the double bind. But here's the kicker. Despite all these behavioral adjustments, the research data is just a contradictory mess. For instance, a woman might get penalized for being too bossy in one department, but then she's highly praised for being decisive in another, for doing the exact same thing. If it was really just a matter of displaying the right leadership traits, the outcomes would be consistent. But they aren't. And that inconsistency, well, that points us toward a totally different culprit. Section 2, flipping the script. Now, what's really fascinating about this is the stark contrast between how things used to be viewed and where the research is pointing us now. The old focus was entirely about leader attributes, how she acts, what strategies she employs to navigate bias. But this new focus, it places the active agency squarely on the observer. We're now looking at observer motives, evaluator identity, and resource stakes. This paradigm shift essentially means the bias isn't about what the leader does, it's all about what the evaluator is trying to achieve. So the crucial point here is something called motivated cognition. Now, I know that sounds like a heavy academic term, but in everyday language, just think of it like evaluators wearing tinted glasses. They aren't just passive sponges soaking up societal stereotypes. No, they're active participants. They selectively filter, they amplify, or they completely ignore information to achieve their own desired psychological goals. Quite literally, they only see what they are motivated to see. And this brilliantly illustrates the entire mechanism working in real time. The motivation-driven process model starts with individual and contextual factors, so things like a person's status within a company or the broader corporate culture. Now, these factors trigger specific observer motives. Those motives then drive a selective appraisal of the leader's cues, which ultimately predicts whether the evaluation outcome is biased or equitable. It's basically a complete, highly predictable psychological chain reaction. Moving on to Section 3, Motive 1, which is identity protection. This behavior basically splits into 2 distinct paths based on what the observer's goal is. First, there's identity threat, where the goal is to affirm your in-group status against a perceived threat. To do this, the observer actively links the leader to negative stereotypes. So, for example, a threatened male executive in a traditional firm might selectively frame a woman's assertiveness as overly aggressive, basically just to protect his own de facto in-group status. But then we have identity affinity, where the goal is affirming a shared identity. These observers actually de-link the leader from stereotypes. Think about women crowdfunders backing female tech founders. They don't look at it and see risk, they see resilience and competence, because they share the specific experience of navigating a male-dominated field. It's the exact same behavior, but an entirely different motivated appraisal. To wrap up this first motive, it really just boils down to this. Evaluators protect who they are or who they want to be. I mean, have you ever caught yourself doing this? These evaluations are frequently not objective measures of a leader's skill at all. They're actually defense mechanisms designed to protect the observer's own self-esteem and group status within an organization. Okay, let's see how this builds into our next core concept. Section 4, Motive 2, Value Alignment. Value alignment also takes 2 distinct paths. The first is value conviction. This is all about reaffirming deeply held beliefs. A traditionalist observer who expects male-type leadership will selectively emphasize cues that confirm their view, maybe focusing heavily on a woman's personal circumstances just to justify a lower evaluation. Conversely, we have value dissonance. This is about resolving really uncomfortable cognitive tension. Imagine a liberal manager who champions equity but happens to work in a highly conservative firm. They might selectively amplify a woman leader's competence cues to resolve that awkward friction between their personal egalitarian beliefs and the company's traditional culture. Impartially speaking, whether you lean left or right, observers manipulate the data in their own minds to maintain their psychological equilibrium. The big takeaway here is incredibly straightforward. We selectively filter what we see so our evaluations align with our core beliefs. We essentially act as our own personal PR firm, spinning the internal data to maintain our worldview. This motivated filter ensures that people only process the information that makes them comfortable, completely regardless of the objective facts presented by the leader's actual performance. It's wild, right?
Section 5, Motive 3, Resource Dependence.
Think of this motive as a pragmatic, survival-based detective story of who needs who. With bilateral dependence, there's a direct reliance on the leader for your own survival. Let's say you're an employee and your company is facing a sudden financial collapse. You drop your biases exceptionally quickly because you directly need that boss's skills to keep your job. You evaluate strictly based on competence. But multilateral dependence, that's much trickier. This is when an observer is worried about third-party stakeholders. Think of a venture capital investor evaluating a highly capable female founder. That investor might actually believe in her, but they penalize her anyway because they think other subsequent investors will be biased. They conform to expected market biases purely to protect their own financial resources. So what actually triggers these survival instincts in the real world? Well, it comes down to structural triggers. Network dynamics, the expectations of external stakeholders, and environmental resource scarcity, which is famously tied to the glass cliff phenomenon. Now, the glass cliff is when women are promoted to leadership during times of severe crisis. Viewed through this motivated cognition lens, it's not simply a trap to set women up to fail. It's actually a crisis forcing evaluators to finally drop their identity and value-based biases. They suddenly care strictly about objective crisis management skills because the firm's survival literally depends on it. Which brings us to this highly surprising realization. When survival is at stake, observers suddenly focus on competence, not stereotypes. Economic distress and resource scarcity actually broaden a biased observer's appraisal process. When their own survival is on the line, they suddenly can't afford the luxury of gender bias. It's a fascinating paradox that crisis essentially breeds objectivity. Finally, Section 6, Fixing Observers, Not Women. The researchers of the source material officially declare an end to the Fix the Woman era with this super powerful mandate. They say, we prescribe interventions addressing the motivational processes underlying the evaluations of various observers rather than how women might adapt their behaviors. Because ultimately, it's time to investigate the hidden motives of the evaluators. Why does this matter for you? Because true organizational equity requires us to address these deep structural and psychological motives. It is absolutely not about handing women yet another seminar on how to tweak their communication styles. No way. It's about recognizing the motivated cognition of the specific people holding the pen on the performance review. I want to conclude with this provocative final thought to leave you reflecting on your own habits. Next time you evaluate a leader, what is your motive? Are you protecting your identity? Are you trying to align with your personal values? Or are you protecting your resources? We all have underlying psychological filters. The first step to true objectivity is simply recognizing them. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and stay curious.